The blizzard wasn't the deadliest thing in the valley that night. Not by a long shot. Silas Morgan knew that because he'd seen what men could do. The storm, it howled and bit with teeth of ice, sure. It could swallow a man whole and spit out his bones come spring. But the evil that walked on two legs? That was a whole different kind of cold. He stood at his cabin window, a ghost in his own home, watching the world turn to white. 10 years he'd been hiding out here. 10 years since the war, since he'd hung up his surgeon's tools, since he'd buried his wife and the life he was supposed to have. 10 years of silence. Just after midnight, he saw it. A flicker. A shape in the swirling chaos. Couldn't be. Nobody was fool enough to be out in this. He took another sip of whiskey, wanting to unsee it. But there it was again. A person, hunched over, fighting the wind, stumbling straight for his cabin. Every instinct screamed at him to turn away. Lock the door. Let the storm take what it wanted. His solitude was a fortress he'd spent a decade building, brick by painful brick. Then the shape went down, just vanished into a drift of snow. He slammed his cup down, cursed the man he used to be, the man who took an oath. He grabbed his heavy coat. The wind hit him like a fist, the cold a physical thing clawing at his face. He fought his way around the porch, following a feeling more than a sight. And then he found them. It wasn't one person. It was two. A woman, her face nearly blue, kneeling in the snow. Her clothes were fine once, now they were just torn, frozen rags, and bundled in her arms, pressed tight against her chest, was a little girl. Maybe 4 or 5 years old. Snowflakes were gathering in her pale eyelashes like tiny jewels. The woman looked up, and Silas saw a fear in her eyes that had nothing to do with the cold. It was raw. Animal. "They killed my husband," she whispered through cracked lips. "They'll take my daughter." And then she collapsed, a dead weight in the snow. Silas didn't hesitate. He scooped them both up, the woman over one shoulder, the child cradled in his other arm. He carried them inside, kicked the door shut against the howling dark, and laid them by the fire. As he bolted the door, he had no idea he'd just locked out the storm, but locked in a war. Eleanor Whitman woke to the crackle of a fire. For a second, she thought she was dead. The last thing she remembered was the cold. A cold that didn't just chill your bones, it stole your soul. Then panic shot through her. Lily. She sat bolt upright, ignoring the sharp pain in her side. Her daughter. Where was her daughter? "She's sleeping." The voice came from the shadows. Deep, rough. Eleanor's head snapped toward the sound. A man sat in a rocking chair, his face half hidden. He was big, broad-shouldered. A thick beard shot through with gray. His eyes caught the firelight, and they were a startling green. Guarded. "Where is she?" Eleanor demanded, her voice a raw rasp. He just nodded toward a small bed against the far wall. And there she was. A little lump under the blankets, a cascade of golden curls on the pillow. Lily. Breathing deep and peaceful. Relief washed over Eleanor so hard her limbs went weak. "Thank you," she whispered. The man said nothing, just watched her with those unreadable eyes. "You're safe here," he finally said. "For now." He got up and moved into the light. He told her about her injuries. 2 broken ribs, bruising, exposure. He spoke like a doctor, listing symptoms, clinical, detached. "Are you a physician?" she asked. A shadow passed over his face. "I was. Once." He turned back to the fire. The silence stretched out, thick and heavy. "Those men you mentioned," he said, his back still to her. "Who are they?" The name felt like poison on her tongue. "Judge Harlan Blackwood." She told him everything. About her husband, Edmund. About the silver vein he found on their land. A vein so rich it would change their lives. She told him how Edmund went to file the claim and never came home. They called it a mining accident. But Edmund was careful. He knew those tunnels. "The judge believes Edmund hit a map," she explained, her voice dropping to a whisper. "He's right. Edmund didn't trust him. He hid it where only I could find it. Her voice hardened. When I wouldn't tell him where, he decided to take Lily. He said he'd raise her as his ward, until I remembered. The big man's jaw tightened. So you ran. We had to. We've been running for 3 days. Tears finally came. The storm. I thought we were going to die. He said nothing, just stared into the flames. After a long moment, he finally turned. The weariness in his face was ancient. You rest, he said. Heal. The storm won't be done for 2 more days. After that, we'll see. He grabbed his coat. Where are you going? She asked, a new fear rising. To check the animals, he said, his hand on the latch. Bolt this behind me. And then he was gone. Eleanor slid the heavy bolt into place. She looked around the small, sparse cabin. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with medical texts. This man, Silas he'd called himself, was no simple frontiersman. She had traded the blizzard for the shelter of a stranger. But as she looked at the bolted door, she couldn't help but wonder if she had just exchanged one kind of cage for another. Silas forced his way to the barn, leaning into the wind. He welcomed the cold. It was a clean pain, something to focus on besides the woman and child in his house, the very thing he'd sworn to never let happen. Inside the barn, the smell of hay and horse was a comfort. The familiar routine of chores was mindless, soothing, but his thoughts kept going back to the cabin, back to the woman, back to the marks he'd seen on her back when he'd tended her injuries. They weren't from a fall. They weren't from running through the woods. He knew those marks. He'd seen them in the war, on the backs of men who'd been interrogated. The kind of marks a whip leaves when it's used with cold, methodical precision. The judge hadn't just threatened her. He'd tortured her. A rage so hot and sudden it blurred his vision swept through him. It was an old, familiar feeling. The battlefield rage. The rage of a man who'd seen too much injustice. He gripped a pitchfork so hard the wood groaned. He'd buried that man 10 years ago. He couldn't let him out. Not now. Not ever. He leaned against the barn wall, forcing his breathing to slow. In, out, until the red haze faded. They had to go. As soon as the storm broke, he'd send them on their way. Give them supplies, point them toward another town, far away from Judge Blackwood's reach. He couldn't get involved. He couldn't risk it. He couldn't risk failing again. The memory of his wife, Sarah, rose up unbidden, her face bright with fever, her hand growing cold in his. He was a doctor. He'd saved hundreds of men, but he couldn't save his own wife, his own unborn son. When he got back to the cabin, Eleanor was up, a cup of tea in her hand. The animals? She asked. The simple domestic question hit him like a punch. It was so normal, so achingly familiar. They're fine, he mumbled, stamping the snow off his boots. You should be resting, he said, his voice rougher than he intended. I've rested enough. Her eyes swept over his bookshelves. You were a teacher before you were a doctor? No, he said, pouring his own tea. My father was a professor. The books, they were his. He didn't know why he'd told her that. He hadn't spoken of his father in years. She winced, a flicker of pain crossing her face as she shifted in her chair. His doctor's instincts took over before he could stop them. Let me check your bandages. He knelt before her, his hands careful, clinical. He lifted the edge of the shirt he'd given her, checking the wrappings around her ribs. As he started to lower it, she grabbed his wrist. Her grip was surprisingly strong. You saw them, didn't you? She asked, her voice low. The marks. He met her eyes. There was no shame there, only steel. Yes. 3 days, she said, her voice steady. They questioned me for 3 days before I got away. They thought pain would make me talk. Did it? He asked. The question was brutal, but he had to know. Her chin lifted. No. But if they get their hands on Lily. The unspoken threat hung between them. He'd seen what men like the judge did to get what they wanted. He'd seen the broken bodies and shattered minds they left behind. They won't, he said, the words escaping before he could stop them. Her eyes searched his face. Why are you helping us, Silas? You live out here alone. You obviously want to be left alone. Why us? The real answer was buried under a decade of grief and guilt. I took an oath, he said finally. First, do no harm. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was the only truth he was willing to give. She accepted it, for now. He retreated to his desk, putting his back to her, trying to rebuild the walls she had so effortlessly breached. But as he stared blindly at a page in a medical journal, he knew it was too late. He'd done what he could for them. Once the storm passed, they would have to leave. Because everyone Silas Morgan ever tried to save ended up dead, and he couldn't bear to watch it happen again. For 3 days, the storm locked them in together. 3 days of Silas moving like a ghost through his own home, and 3 days of little Lily slowly, impossibly breaking through his walls. She followed him everywhere, a tiny, golden-haired shadow asking a million questions. Why is your beard so big? Beard keeps my face warm. Why don't you smile? Not much to smile about. My daddy smiled all the time. He's in heaven now. Do you know anyone in heaven? That one stopped him. Yes, he said, his voice quiet. I know people there. By the 3rd day, she was sitting at his feet as he read, playing with a small wooden horse he'd carved years ago for a son he never got to meet. He found himself watching her, and once he almost smiled. On the evening of the 3rd day, the storm broke. The world outside was silent, buried under a thick blanket of white moonlight. It's beautiful, Eleanor said, coming to stand beside him at the window. Deceptively so, he replied. The passes won't be clear for a few more days. He was relieved, and that scared him. He was getting used to them being here. She likes you, Eleanor said softly. She doesn't usually take to strangers. Children are resilient, he said, trying to sound distant. It's more than that. She senses something in you, something good. Before he could argue, a sound from outside cut through the silence. The crunch of boots on snow. Instantly, Silas was on alert, every muscle tensed. Stay back, he whispered, pushing her away from the window. Get Lily, go behind the curtain, and stay quiet. His heart hammered against his ribs. It was too soon. How could they have found them so fast? He slipped out the door, closing it silently behind him. Eleanor watched through a crack in the curtain, her own heart racing. Lily clung to her, sensing the fear. Is it the bad men, Mama? Shh, little flower. The minutes stretched into an eternity. Finally, the door opened. Silas stepped inside. And he wasn't alone. A man in a sheriff's uniform followed him in. He was older, with a weathered face and weary eyes. Mrs. Whitman, Silas said, his voice tight. This is Sheriff Daniel Cooper. He's an old friend. An old friend? What was a sheriff from Silver Creek doing all the way out here? The judge has search parties combing the mountains for you, Cooper said, his voice grave. They're moving methodically. At this rate, they'll be here in 2 days. 2 days. Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. That's why I came, Cooper continued. To warn you, and to offer an alternative. He glanced at Silas. There's a place you can hide. Temporarily, at least. Where? Eleanor asked. Silas looked at her, his expression grim. The Silver Spur Saloon, in town. Go back to Silver Creek, the heart of the danger? It was madness. The last place they'll look for you is right under their noses, Cooper argued, in a building owned by the judge's own family. Who runs this saloon? Eleanor asked, her mind reeling. And that's when Silas delivered the most insane twist of all. Victoria Blackwood, he said. The judge's adoptive daughter. Eleanor couldn't sleep. The choice was impossible. Flee into the mountains, injured with a small child, and hope to outrun the search parties? Or walk back into the lion's den and trust the judge's own daughter? She found Silas by the fire, staring into the flames, a book open but unread in his lap. I've been thinking about the map, she said, sitting opposite him. Edmund encoded it. It's on his old leather belt. The markings look like simple decoration, but they're not. Silas leaned forward, his attention sharp. And you have this belt? Her hand went to her waist, where the belt was hidden beneath her shirt. I'm wearing it. I never take it off. Then the judge will never stop hunting you, he said, his voice grim. Or, she countered, the idea forming even as she spoke it, we use that to stop him. He stared at her. What are you talking about? We go back. We hide with this Victoria Blackwood. And while we're there, we gather enough evidence to bring the judge down for good, for Edmund, for Lily, for everyone. That's suicide, he said flatly. The man owns the town. His reach isn't unlimited, she argued. The law still exists. If we can get evidence to a federal marshal... He stood up, pacing in front of the fire. You're putting a lot of faith in a woman you've never met, a woman who carries the judge's name. Every option is a risk, she said, standing to face him. At least this one gives us a chance to fight back, a chance for a life that isn't spent looking over our shoulder. She reached out, her hand resting on his arm. He tensed, but didn't pull away. You've already done so much. I wouldn't ask you to come. You're not asking, he said, his voice low, and I'm not letting you go alone. He looked from her face to the trundle bed where Lily slept. If we do this, we do it my way. Cautious, planned. Hope, fierce and bright, bloomed in her chest. Does that mean you'll help? It means I'm in, he said. A question had been burning in her mind since she'd woken up in this cabin. Silas, she said softly, why are you really doing this? It's more than just an oath. He was silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. I had a wife, Sarah. We were expecting a son. He stared into the fire, but he was seeing ghosts. I was away at the war. Influenza. By the time I got home, he couldn't finish. The pain in his voice was a raw, open wound. I was a doctor, he said, his voice harsh with self-loathing. I saved strangers, but I couldn't save my own family. So I came here, to punish myself, to make sure I could never fail anyone like that again. Eleanor knelt beside his chair, forcing him to look at her. What happened wasn't your fault, Silas. I should have been there. You're here now, she said, her voice gentle. You're helping us. Maybe it's time to forgive yourself. His green eyes were filled with a pain so deep it stole her breath. I don't know how. You already are, she whispered. He didn't pull away. For a long moment, they just stayed there, the fire crackling between them. Then he gently took her hand from his face. We should sleep, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Tomorrow comes soon enough. As she lay beside Lily, Eleanor's mind was racing. She was walking back into danger. She was trusting her life and her daughter's life to a reclusive, haunted doctor and the unknown motives of a powerful man's daughter. But for the first time since Edmund died, she didn't feel alone. Outside, the moon cast a silver light on the snow, and in the distance, hidden by the trees, the first torches of the judge's search party were getting closer. Their time was running out. Dawn broke, painting the snow pink and gold, but the beauty was spoiled by the pinpricks of light in the trees to the east. Torches. They're coming, Eleanor said, standing beside Silas on the porch. They'll be here by nightfall, he confirmed. We have to leave. Now. Silver Creek, she said, her voice firm. We go to Victoria Blackwood. He just nodded. He'd known what her answer would be. They moved fast. Eleanor packed what little they had. Silas readied the horses. As he worked, he thought about the 10 years of solitude he was about to leave behind. He expected to feel regret. Instead, all he felt was purpose. Lily sat at the table, a solemn little soldier eating her porridge. Can I bring Maple? She asked, holding up the small wooden horse he'd given her. Something in his chest tightened. He knelt down to her level. Of course, every traveler needs a companion. She threw her little arms around his neck in a quick, fierce hug. The unexpected affection nearly knocked him off his feet. They rode out, away from the approaching lights, Following a hidden trail Silas knew that wound through the mountains. The snow was deep, the going slow. By midday they stopped to rest. Lily, a bundle of energy, was exploring the tracks of a snowshoe hare when Silas spoke. "Once we get to town, things get complicated," he said to Eleanor. "I trust Cooper, but this Victoria, even good people can be forced into bad choices." "So we trust, but we stay cautious," she finished for him. Exactly. Just as the sun began to set, they saw it. The town of Silver Creek nestled in the valley below. It looked peaceful from a distance, but looming over it all was the judge's mansion, a dark fortress of stone and power. They met Cooper at an abandoned farm on the edge of town just as twilight fell. "Victoria is expecting you," Cooper said in a low voice. "She's cleared out the entire third floor of the saloon. No one will know you're there." "Has she agreed to help?" Eleanor asked. A strange look passed over Cooper's face. "She's very interested in meeting you, Mrs. Whitman." Something about his tone put Silas on edge. They moved through the back alleys of the town like ghosts. The sounds of a busy saloon grew louder as they approached a discreet service entrance. 3 quick taps, a pause, then 2 more. The door creaked open. A young woman ushered them inside and up a steep flight of back stairs. On the 3rd floor, she knocked on a door. It opened to reveal a woman who commanded the room without saying a word. She was tall, dressed in elegant burgundy with dark hair piled high, but it was her eyes that made Eleanor gasp. They were the exact same startling shade of blue as her husband's. "Mrs. Whitman," the woman said, her voice like smooth velvet, "please come in." She dismissed Cooper, then closed the door, turning to face them. For a long moment, she just studied Eleanor's face. "You look like him," she finally said, her voice soft. "Around the eyes." "Like who?" Eleanor asked, confused. A small, sad smile touched Victoria Blackwood's lips. "Edmund," she said. "Your husband. My brother." The room spun. Eleanor staggered, and Silas caught her arm. "That's not possible," she whispered. "Edmund was an only child." "Our mother died giving birth to him," Victoria explained, her voice heavy with a history of pain. "Our father. He couldn't bear to look at me after that. I reminded him too much of her. He sent me away to live with relatives back east." "How did you end up here? As the judge's daughter?" Silas asked, his voice sharp with suspicion. "I ran away at 16, Victoria said, her eyes hard. "Made my own way. By the time I tracked my family to Silver Creek, my father was dead, and Judge Blackwood was running things. He took an interest in me, adopted me. It was a good cover while I searched for the brother I never knew." Her gaze fixed on Eleanor. "I was about to reach out to Edmund, and then the judge had him killed." The pieces clicked into place. The shared grief, the common enemy. "So you'll help us?" Eleanor asked. "I will do more than help," Victoria said, her voice turning to steel. "Together, we will destroy him." Just then, Lily, who had been watching silently, spoke up. "Are you really my aunt?" Victoria's composure cracked. A genuine, pained smile touched her lips. "Yes, little one, I am." That night, after Eleanor and Lily were settled, Victoria asked Silas to her private office. "I need to know your intentions, Mr. Morgan," she said, pouring 2 glasses of whiskey. He refused his. "Attachments are forming. I see the way you look at my sister-in-law, the way my niece looks at you. My only intention is to see them safe," he said, his jaw tight. "I know about your wife, Silas," she said softly. "Cooper told me. You've been punishing yourself for 10 years. Eleanor and Lily, they could be a second chance." Before he could process the shock of her knowing his past, she slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was a wanted poster. For Eleanor Whitman. The charge, the murder of her husband. "The judge is framing her," Victoria said. "He controls the law here. If she's found, she'll hang." As if that wasn't enough, she delivered another blow. "My sources confirmed it an hour ago. The judge's search party found your cabin this afternoon. They tore it apart looking for you." She paused, her eyes filled with something like pity. Then they burned it to the ground. His home, his sanctuary, the place he'd hidden from the world for a decade, gone, reduced to ash. "It seems there's no going back, Mr. Morgan," Victoria said, her voice low. "Not for any of us." He stood in the hallway a few moments later, the world tilting on its axis. His cabin was gone. Eleanor was a wanted murderer, and his only allies were a saloon madam with a vendetta and a small-town sheriff. The judge had taken everything, his home, his peace, and in that moment, Silas Morgan realized the man he'd buried 10 years ago wasn't dead after all. He was just waiting for a reason to fight. The next morning, Victoria laid out her plan on a large table covered with maps and documents. "I've been collecting evidence against the judge for years," she said. "Bribes, fraud, testimony from his victims. But it's not enough. We need something that proves motive for Edmund's murder." She looked at Eleanor. "We need the map." But then Cooper, the sheriff, dropped a bombshell. "There was a witness," he said, his voice grim. "A miner named Caleb Tucker. He saw the judge's men rig the mine supports that day." "Why didn't he come forward?" Eleanor demanded, her voice shaking with anger. "The judge bought his silence," Victoria answered. "But Caleb is dying of consumption. His conscience is getting the better of him." It was the piece they needed. The map, the witness, Victoria's evidence, but how to get it out of town. "The judge has called a town meeting for noon," Cooper announced. "He's planning to officially redraw the property lines, claiming the silver vein is on his land." "He's moving faster than we thought," Victoria said. "We have to act today." The plan was desperate, insane. Eleanor would walk into that town meeting. She would confront the judge publicly, accuse him in front of the entire town. "They'll arrest me," she protested. "Exactly," Victoria said. "Your appearance will cause chaos. While everyone is distracted, Cooper will slip away with the evidence packet and ride for the federal marshal in Laramie." "It's too risky," Silas growled. "What's my role in this suicide mission?" "You're the backup," Cooper said. "If things go bad, you get Lily out, no matter what." The weight of that promise settled on him. He looked at Eleanor. Her face was pale, but her eyes were burning with a fire he was coming to recognize. "I'll do it," she said, her voice clear and strong. "For Edmund." She trusted him. After everything, she trusted him to protect her daughter. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. They had 2 hours. They stood in the town square, a sea of faces, all turned toward the courthouse steps. The judge stood there, a vision of power and authority, announcing his legal theft of the Whitman claim. Then Eleanor stepped out of the crowd. A gasp went through the town. A dead woman walking. "That's a lie, Judge Blackwood," she called out, her voice ringing with clarity. "And you are a murderer." She laid it all out. The stolen claim, the sabotage, the murder. "And you have proof?" the judge sneered. "I have a witness," she declared. "Caleb Tucker." From the edge of the crowd, the dying miner stepped forward, confirming everything. The town was in an uproar. The judge's face was a mask of fury. "And I have this," Eleanor cried, pulling the tooled leather belt from her waist. "Edmund's map, the one you tortured me for." "Arrest her!" the judge roared. His men surged forward. Silas drew his revolver. "Stop!" he commanded. The square was a powder keg ready to blow, and that's when he heard it. A child's scream. "Mama!" From behind the courthouse, one of the judge's men appeared, dragging a struggling Jenny, and behind him, another man carried a kicking, screaming Lily. The trap had been sprung. "It seems I hold the winning hand after all," the judge said, a cruel smile on his face. He took Lily, holding her in front of him like a shield. "Drop your weapons. Retract your statement, Mrs. Whitman, or the child dies." Eleanor's face went white. She looked at Silas, her eyes begging for an answer. "Trust me," he mouthed. He had a desperate, half-cocked idea. Eleanor turned back to the judge, her chin high. "No," she said. "I won't." The judge nodded to his men. A poor choice. But as he spoke, Silas fired. Not at the judge, but at the massive, ice-laden pine branch hanging directly over the courthouse steps. The crack of the pistol was followed by the splintering of wood. The branch crashed down. Men scattered. The man holding Lily dropped her and dove for cover. Silas was already moving. He sprinted, scooped up Lily, and ran. "This way!" Victoria yelled, pulling Eleanor toward an alley. They fled through the maze of the town, the judge's furious shouts echoing behind them. They made it to the edge of town, to the horses they'd stashed. But as they mounted, a group of riders appeared, cutting them off. They were trapped. They rode hard for the mountains, the judge's men on their heels. They found shelter in an old abandoned hunter's cabin, deep in the woods. They were exhausted, terrified, but they were together. That night, as Silas stood watch, he heard a twig snap. "Someone's outside," he whispered, waking the others. They peered through the window. A dozen riders were surrounding the cabin, moving in slowly. "The root cellar!" Victoria hissed, pulling up a hidden trap door. They scrambled down into the damp, dark space just as the cabin door crashed open above them. They could hear boots on the floorboards, men shouting. Then they smelled it. Kerosene. They were going to burn the cabin, with them inside it. The whoosh of the flames was terrifying. Smoke began to pour through the floorboards. The heat was unbearable. Silas and Victoria found a second hidden exit, an old vegetable hatch, and they crawled out into the night just as the roof of the cabin collapsed in a shower of sparks. They had escaped, but their horses were gone. They were on foot, in the middle of a frozen wilderness, with the judge's men hunting them like animals. Their only hope was to reach a Shoshone camp a day's journey north, a place where Silas had friends. They walked through the night. Silas carried Lily, who had finally cried herself to sleep. Sometime before dawn, exhausted, they made a small, hidden camp to rest for a few hours. Silas woke to Eleanor's scream. "She's gone! Lily's gone!" He was on his feet in an instant. Her small footprints led away from the camp. She must have woken up and wandered off. But a few yards away, another set of tracks joined hers. Boot prints. Just then, a rider appeared. One of the judge's men. He tossed a note at Eleanor's feet. "The judge wants a trade," he sneered. "The girl for the map. Noon. Gallows Hill. Come alone." He had her. The monster had her daughter. Eleanor wanted to run, to give him anything he wanted. But Silas held her back. "He'll kill you both," he said. "We need a plan. Something he won't expect." Their time was running out, and the stakes had never been higher. Gallows Hill was a lonely, windswept place, dominated by an ancient oak tree where justice, or something like it, used to be served. Eleanor walked up the path alone. At the top, the judge waited, holding Lily tight. Silas watched from the rocks above, his rifle steady. Victoria was hidden in the trees on the opposite side. "The belt," the judge demanded. "Now." Eleanor slowly unbuckled the belt and placed it on the ground. The judge's man snatched it up. The judge inspected it, a greedy smile spreading across his face. "Unfortunately for you," he said, tucking the belt into his coat, "your value just expired." He nodded to his men. That was the signal. Victoria's rifle cracked from the trees. One of the men went down. Silas rose from the rocks. "Let the child go, Judge!" But Blackwood was cunning. He pulled a small derringer, pressing it to Lily's temple, using her as a shield. "One more move and she dies!" They were at a stalemate. Then Silas had a new, even more desperate idea. A final, terrible bluff. "That's not the real map," he shouted. The judge hesitated. "The belt is a fake, a decoy. I know where the real one is. Let Lily go, and I'll take you to it." "Why should I trust you?" the judge snarled. "Because I'll go with you," Silas said. "Alone." Eleanor's eyes went wide with terror, but she saw the resolve in his, and she understood. The judge, consumed by his greed, agreed. He pushed Lily toward Eleanor and motioned for Silas to follow him. "Trust me," Silas whispered to Eleanor as he passed her. "Get Lily to the Shoshone camp. Wait for Cooper." They rode to the charred ruins of his cabin. "Where is it?" the judge demanded. Silas knelt in the ash. He pried up a scorched floorboard, revealing nothing but dirt. He looked up at the judge, a calm acceptance on his face. There is no other map, Silas said, but I bought them time. Cooper is on his way back with the law. A cruel smile touched the judge's lips. You think I'm a fool? Cooper never made it to Laramie. My men intercepted him. Your evidence is ash, just like your home. Dread, cold, and absolute washed over Silas. You've sealed your fate, Doctor, the judge said, raising the derringer. You can kill me, Silas said, his voice steady. But you can't kill the truth. The gunshot echoed through the silent, ruined valley. Pain exploded in his chest. As the world went dark, his last thought was of Lily and the promise he had made. He woke to Eleanor's voice, pulling him back from a peaceful darkness. He was lying in the ashes, a fire burning in his chest. You're alive, she sobbed. He'd been unconscious for hours. Cooper, he managed to rasp. He's alive, she said, relief flooding her voice. The judge's men ambushed him, but he hid the evidence before they got him. Victoria found him and rode to Laramie herself. The federal marshal, Silas, they're here. Just then, riders appeared. Victoria, Cooper, his arm in a sling, and a handful of men with federal badges. The marshal knelt beside him. The judge is back in town, surrounded. It's over. It was over. Justice was coming. They took him to the Shoshone camp. The medicine man worked his magic, pulling the bullet from his chest, stitching him up with practiced hands. 3 days later, he woke up in a lodge. Lily was sitting beside him, playing with pine needles. "Mr. Silas is awake!" she shouted. Eleanor rushed in, her face a miracle of relief and joy. "The judge?" he asked. "Dead," she said softly. "He tried to shoot his way out." Justice at last. She told him Victoria was taking over the saloon, turning it into a respectable hotel. Cooper was the acting judge, and Edmund's claim, the silver mine, was being legally filed in Lily's name. Her future was secure. "And you?" he asked, his voice still weak. "What will you do?" She took his hand. "Victoria offered us a home, but I don't want to build our future alone, Silas. When I thought I'd lost you," her voice broke, "I realized you're a part of that future." He looked into her eyes and saw a life he thought he'd lost forever. A chance to heal, a chance to love again. "Silver Creek needs a doctor," she said, a small smile playing on her lips. He smiled back. "Is that a prescription, Mrs. Whitman?" "It is, Dr. Morgan." Just then, Lily took his hand. "Are you going to stay with us, Mr. Silas?" she asked, her big blue eyes full of hope. He looked from her innocent face to her mother's. He saw his future. He saw his home. "Yes," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm staying." They built a new life from the ashes of the old. A doctor, a teacher, and a little girl who knew the magic of pine cones. They had faced down the worst kind of monster and won. They had found justice in a lawless land and found love in a world of loss. It just goes to show. Sometimes the deepest wounds are the ones that lead you right where you were always meant to be. If you enjoyed this story of justice and redemption, hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss the tales we have coming next.